Hello and welcome to the new edition of Vieco.live. Today I'm going to talk about controller-dins again. I'm going to talk about resident controller-dins again, and I'm actually going to talk about how to get rid of the single instance code unit which was there last time, and I'm going to show how to replace that with a better approach. You may notice, or you might have noticed from my blogs, from my sessions, from my presentations and public speeches that I'm not really a fan of single instance code units. And this is not the first time I'm going to talk about them on Vieco.live. I'm going to cover that even more in the future. But for now, I just want to focus on what we had last time, and let's just jump straight into the topic and let's continue where we ended last week. So I'm simply going to present the demo. If you remember, this was actually, yeah, this, I left the debugger on, so I'm just going to sign in again. We had a resident controller-din, one that was listening to keystrokes, and when I pressed something, it told me, it both showed the key press here, and it showed, this was actually coming from AL, it showed me which key was pressed based on the event which was returned by JavaScript. And then I also had this simple dialog, and this dialog has talked to the controller-din using the single instance code unit. So when I click this, it actually calls the controller-din with the update method. The update method sets the background to orange, and it actually shows me that my pop-up could easily talk to my controller-din. Let's take a look at, I have to restart my window. Okay, so let's take a look at what we had. So first of all, we had this page which hosted the controller-din. We had this resident controller-din code unit. It was single instance, and it received a reference of the current page .resident, which is the controller-din. So from within here, I have stored the reference to that controller-din, and then my pop-up page, when I start that page on open page, I call this resident code unit update method, and this would in turn call the update on this stored reference. Pretty nice, except for the fact that this is a single instance code unit, and I don't want it to be a single instance code unit. I want to have a different approach. I want to actually show a different way of actually passing the reference or calling the front end. So let's take a look. The first thing I will do is I'm going to take this single instance away. So I'm going to store this, and I'm going to show how this broke everything. So I'm going to run my demo. It's the same demo, of course, and I'm going to scroll down. Here's my controller-din, and then I'm going to start my resident pop-up. And what happens is, as you can see, there is a stop. Debugger stops, and it stops on resident.update. And why does it stop? Because this is not a single instance code unit anymore. The reference I had here is not the same reference as was stored in the page. So I actually cannot do that anymore. So here, this resident is uninitialized. Calling update on that will cause a runtime error, and this will not work. So you can see that it actually tells you that a .NET variable has not been instantiated. In the background, the AL runtime uses .NET to represent this. This hasn't changed. The only thing that has changed is the way how you develop controller-dins. So you do not develop them using .NET anymore, but in the background, behind the scenes, they are actually still using .NET. You don't need to be worried about that. This is not going to make the controller-din not run in Business Central, Microsoft SaaS. It doesn't matter. It is just how the variable is represented. So as you can see, we cannot call it anymore because it's not a single instance anymore. So we have to do something else. Okay, I'm going to stop the runtime, and then I'm going to do a couple of steps. First of all, my resident page is not going to have this as a local variable. I'm going to move that into my global variable. So I want to have a global reference to this code unit to be alive as long as the page is alive. When the page goes out of scope, this variable will go out of scope, and whatever functionality was present there will not be relevant anymore. Back in this single instance code unit, I'm going to first create a new function, or procedure if you want, and I'm going to call it retrieve instance. And here I'm going to have var and then resident out, and this will be control add-in resident. So instead of retrieving this code unit, I'm going to pass the reference to the control add-in itself, to whoever needs it. And then I'm going to just return a boolean, and this boolean will indicate whether or not I have successfully passed this reference out. So you could naively think that I can just do resident out equals resident, because I already have this reference. But that's not true. I mean, it cannot happen simply because this code unit still lives only inside of this page. So whoever calls this retrieve instance will not be able to talk to the same instance of the code unit. So somehow I need to be able to retrieve this reference from the living instance of this code unit. And you may guess that for that I'm going to use events. So I'm going to do event subscriber instance equals manual. I want to manually subscribe this code unit to events. And you will see shortly why is that. First of all, I need an event publisher to be invoked, and that event publisher is actually going to pass the reference to whoever listens to that event. So I'm going to create a local procedure, and I'm going to on retrieve instance, and that one will have the same resident out, control it in resident, and I'm going to have handled, which is going to be boolean. So this is going to be an event. I'm going to create an integration event, false, false, and that is just going to be my publisher. So my retrieve instance is first going to do it's going to invoke this publisher on retrieve instance, and then I'm going to pass resident out, and then I need to pass handled. So I'm actually going to name this exit parameter as handled, and I'm going to pass it to here. Cool. So what do I have at this point? When anybody calls retrieve instance to retrieve the instance of the current control in the resident control in, I'm going to call the publisher, and this publisher will be responded to by a code unit which holds that reference. So coincidentally, it's this same code unit, so I'm going to have another one on retrieve instance subscriber. This is not something you normally have, like subscriber and publisher to the same event in the same code unit, but sometimes it helps. So here I'm going to have again the same signature as this, so I'm just going to copy the signature, and I'm going to subscribe this. And here I'm subscribing to object type code unit, sorry. This is called resident. Then I'm going to have the name of the event on retrieve instance. This is empty, and false, false. So I'm now subscribing to this publisher, and this is where my event subscriber instance comes from. The first thing I'm going to do is from my resident page, one thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to do bind subscription and then bind resident code unit to itself. So in essence, I'm binding this instance to events. So at this stage, this instance, which also holds the reference to my control add-in, will respond to the onRetrieve instance event. So what I need to do here is I need to say resident out equals resident, because I already hold that reference. And then I need to set handled to true. Since this one is manually subscribed, this one will only respond as long as this instance is alive. So when this page is closed, this instance dies, the event subscriber is unsubscribed, and this will not respond anymore, which means that on retrieve instance, handled will be false, and resident out will actually not be assigned. So that is all I need to do inside of this. I actually do not need this function anymore. We will see why shortly. So this function is not needed anymore. And this initialization is now complete. So I have a global variable, which is going to stay alive for as long as the page is alive. I pass the reference to the resident into this code unit. So this code unit now holds the reference to the control in. I bind the subscriptions so that when retrieve instance is called, this subscriber will respond. It will pass its reference out to this method, which now can be called from anywhere. So if I go in here and instead of just calling resident update, which I cannot do anymore, I will just do resident control. This is going to be controlled in resident. And I want to retrieve this. So I will do if resident dot retrieve instance and resident control. This means that I have successfully retrieved the instance. Then I'm going to do resident control update. Let me just see, what did I? Yeah, of course, then is missing. I spent too much time in other languages, so update. And that's it. If I was lucky with everything I did and I didn't forget to do anything, this is just going to work. So here I now have my resident subpage, and if I click setup and extensions, I can click resident pop-up and it opens and it turns this one to yellow, sorry, orange. That's and we can actually see how it all went. I'm going to put a breakpoint in here and we can see where did this code go and what are the things that happened. So when I go to resident pop-up, it now first wants to retrieve the instance of the resident control. So for that, I'm going to step into, and I'm in an instance of this code unit, but that instance is not the same that holds this reference, right? You can see this one is uninitialized. So the first thing I need to do, I need to retrieve it. So I call the publisher, and now the publisher responds and subscriber responds. And this is the subscriber that actually holds this. It's not uninitialized, it's unknown. This is how the compiler, or actually the debugger shows control is. So we do have this reference, we assign it, we say handled is true, which means that we have successfully retrieved the reference that we hold, and then from here, handled is now true, and when I return it out, resident control is not uninitialized anymore. It actually holds the reference. So with this little trick, we have actually been able to have a resident controlled in, which can give its own reference to whoever needs that reference at any given point without having to have a single instance code unit. I'm going to soon have a session about single instance code unit. I'm thinking of maybe doing it next week, but I will see about that. And I'm going to talk about why single instance code units are bad. They're not bad per se, they are bad if you do not consider other options. They are just bad if you, by default, without thinking or considering anything else, just say single instance true. So I don't want to do these kinds of things. I actually want to not use single instance code units. So here, the first step I've done is I've gotten rid of single instance code units. One of the main reasons why I do not like single instance code units is because they are inherently not really testable. So to really be able to test things properly, you need to have something better. And yes, now we have something better, but this is still not testable. And I'm not going to talk about testability of control inits yet. I'm going to talk about that in a later session. But today I want to show how we can prepare this for testability. So instead of really passing the control in, reference around. This is something that your test code will not have. Your test code will not have this reference, so we need to do something else. Instead of simply having this reference, I'm going to create a new interface. So I'm going to call it iResident interface.al. It's going to be interface iResident, and it's going to have just one method called update. So that's all. The next thing I will do is I'm going to rename this resident code unit into resident keeper, because this code unit it does not really represent this control entity anymore. It is used simply to keep the reference and to give the reference to whoever needs it. So I'm going to call it resident keeper code unit, and I'm going to rename the code unit itself. So I'm going to call it resident keeper. So if I save all my files, now my resident page has a reference to resident keeper. I'm also going to rename this as resident keeper, and here inside of my pop-up page I'm going to rename this into resident keeper. Okay, good. Now I need to implement this interface, so I'm going to create a real resident codeunit.al, and it's going to be codeunit 50,101, and it's going to be simply called resident, and it's going to implement iResident. So inside of here I need to have obviously procedure update, because this is to implement the interface, and from here I want to update, or actually call the update method on the controller then. So where do I get this controller then a reference? I'm actually going to have it stored globally, so I'm going to have var resident is going to be controller then resident, and then I'm going to have a procedure initialize, which receives this resident in control add-in resident and stores the reference to the control add-in. So I can call this resident.update, and now I'm calling it on the actual control add-in reference. So how do I pass this reference from here? Obviously from the resident page. So here I'm going to create a local variable. It's going to be resident, and it's going to be code unit resident now. And besides initializing my keeper, I'm going to do resident dot initialize, and I'm going to initialize this with the curb page dot resident. So I'm storing the reference to my control add-in inside of my resident code unit. And I want to do another thing. My resident keeper is not going to keep the reference to the control add-in anymore. It's actually going to keep a reference to interface iResident. Okay, that's the only thing it needs to do. So why is that? Because I want this to be testable. I want this to properly respond in all test scenarios. And in my test scenarios, maybe this interface or the actual code unit will not be the controller in it, may be a mock. This is why I'm doing that. So here I'm going back to my resident page. Apparently I cannot initialize this with my controller in reference. I will initialize it with the interface reference, and interface reference is this. So I first store the reference to the controller in my interface code unit. Then I pass the interface code unit to my resident keeper. And then my pop-up page, of course, it also cannot have controller in. It will simply just use resident, and it's going to have interface iResident. So that's it. What happens now is that when my page opens, I first store the reference to the controller in this code unit. Then I initialize my resident keeper with my interface, and I store the reference to this interface inside. Then my page retrieves that reference Using the same mechanism, it will again be the publisher and then the subscriber, which holds this actual reference to the interface. It will pass it out to the caller, and my caller at this point will have this. I'm going to have to set a breakpoint at this place, and I'm going to run this. And let's take a look. So first, obviously, this still works quite fine. I can do things like this, and then when I click resident pop-up, let's see what happens. So resident is an interface. But I hoped that it would show that it's uninitialized, but it doesn't. So if I step into this and then step into this, this one will respond. It will pass that reference out. This is now true, and I can go on and just have this. So once again, I'm going to refresh this page. I don't know why this is happening. And then I'm going to show that this now works through an interface reference rather than just a plain controller-in reference. So this is all I wanted to talk about today, all I wanted to present. I hope that you like what you saw, and I hope that this made sense for you. Actually, I forgot to do this because I did prepare some interface work, so we did have some fun with interfaces. Waldo gives me a tip to use snippets. Thank you, Waldo. I will remember it for the next time. So in this particular case, snippets could save me like grand total of 3.5 seconds. So yeah, I didn't want to paste code. I wanted to type code. It's far easier for people to follow what is happening when I program than when I simply dump a chunk of code on screen and then you have to figure out what was really going on. So, do you have any questions? Do you want to ask something about this? Whatever, like anything at all that has to do with resident controller-ins, why I used interfaces, or if you didn't follow why I used interfaces or anything like that. Come on, let's have some fun. Yeah, and maybe we should use this. I keep forgetting that I have like 10, maybe 15 seconds delay. So, are there any questions at all? No questions? Well, if there are no questions, I'm simply going to close this. I'm going to put this code into the same repo I used last time. Okay, just a comment. Yeah, thank you. Nice one. Thanks a lot. So a little bit about what is going to happen next on Vehicle.live. One of the things I wanted to address is some real life use case scenarios for resident controller-ins. I think I'm going to postpone that one because I'm not too sure. I mean, last time we touched that a little bit, and that session would just be a series of demos of like, look at this and look at that without much explanations or theory. And, you know, I like theory. I like to explain how things work, not just spending time showcasing functionality. So maybe we cover that at some point, but I'm not sure. One of the things I absolutely want to address is single instance code units, and I'm thinking of next week covering that topic. I'm thinking of going into why I believe single instance code units are bad, and how you can, in essence, address almost all of single instance code unit scenarios without actually using single instance code units. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm not sure if it's going to be next week, but it is going to be one of the following weeks. And then there is going to be one more topic, which is testability. I want to really talk about testing controller-ins. So far, in several of my sessions about controller-ins, about interfaces, and now again about controller-ins, resident controller-ins, I have introduced this topic of controller-in testability. And I have laid the groundwork. I have explained how we can use interfaces to represent our control events. Now we have seen it twice already. So what I want to do is I want to go into that and show this from a test code unit, what this looks like and why this approach really helps. And this testability will not only address the resident control events, it will address any control events. So this is also one of the topics I'm going to cover. And then after that, we will see where it takes us. I don't have anything yet prepared or decided. We'll see. So if you have any ideas, any wishes, please comment in the comment section. And yeah, that would be it. Since there were no questions in the past 5 minutes that I babbled around, so hit the subscribe button over there and then click the bell icon to receive the notifications when there are new videos or new announcements on this channel. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next release of Viego.live next Friday. Thanks a lot. Follow my blog, follow my video blog, and see you around. Have a nice weekend. Bye.